We're going to talk about big rocks. I had it full, and then the ride here, you know how it settles? You've seen those cereal boxes? It settles. It's not full. I didn't bring the other ingredients. And I thought, this was, I don't know, probably this was first done 20 years ago, this illustration where the guy takes the big rocks, and then you say it's full, and then he dumps in smaller rocks, and they all go in, and then he says, is it full? And then you do the sand, and then you do the water. Is everybody familiar with that or not? And so I thought, well, I'm just going to bring the big rocks because I don't want to take the time to dump all that in. I want to talk about the big rocks. So that's what we're going to do today, talk about the big rocks. You know what would be interesting? I know people do all kinds of surveys and stuff, but it would be interesting. I think Daniel in the lion's den is pretty well has been heard of by everybody. But I don't know if everybody's heard of it. But there's a huge unchurched population, a lot of people. You did drive here this morning, didn't you? And you do drive in the mornings during the week. Yeah, it's different. So I don't know. I have been fortunate enough to have heard this story as a little kid, 5, 6 years old. When my grandmother lived with us, and of course I went to church, and so I heard about the story. Now, I was not told the way I'm typically not the way we teach little kids, but and actually I couldn't tell you what I was taught. I just remember the story, and it's impacted my life. But in this particular story, there's something that is huge, and it's not said. The Bible doesn't come out and say, okay, take notes, this is huge. Last week we talked about, let me just pause the tape for a minute here. Not literally, guys, but just pause. Okay, so we live in a country that's overwhelmed and overloaded and overstressed and over everything, are we not? And so people are on, I guess we all should have invested in depression medication and so on, but because we are, I mean, it's just, and so we're taking medication for a lot of things we probably shouldn't. But I don't want to be too simplistic and suggest to you that if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll never get depressed. That's not my point. But instead of it being a 10, maybe it would be an 8 or a 7. Or maybe you wouldn't be as overwhelmed or overloaded. All I'm saying is there are some things that, there are spiritual remedies for some things. Not totally. So we go back to the book of Daniel, we see this, and we said, okay, you have God, and then you have, we said, life, and we'll call that the engine and the transmission. So we'll say God's the engine, and then there's the transmission or whatever. So what's the connection? There has to be a connection between God and life that makes it all go and work together. And too many believers are stalled out, overwhelmed, and overloaded. And I'm not talking about seasons of life or anything like that. I mean, if you've ever moved, you are overwhelmed for at least a couple days anyway. I mean, there's no way around that, all right? So, okay. So, Daniel, as we said last week, I just can't imagine, as a teenager, being captured by a foreign army and taken back to a foreign country, being thrown into their educational system, and all their values are different, and their teachings are different, and their way of life is different. And Daniel did so well, despite all that. And then later in life, he had other things come up, and today we're looking still at Daniel in the lion's den. And I think it would be wrong to try to tackle this story in just 1 week, so we're going to drill down today on some more golden nuggets, and then we'll wrap it up probably next week. But in this chapter, I think Daniel gives us the key to his calmness and his composure. Because if tomorrow you were going to be fed to the lions and there was no way out, what would you do? Would you be calm? And you couldn't leave the country, all right? So tomorrow's execution time. I don't know what it'd be like to get ripped by lions, but society, okay, first of all, in America, we are so nice to everybody. We are. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we have no clue. I think the worst we have come up with in America as far as torture goes is waterboarding. You do survive, but it's probably not comfortable. And I'm not here to make a case for or against. I'm just saying, so that would be like horrible to a lot of people, all right? But I'll tell you, I don't even like to read about what some countries have done in the annals of history, or even today. The way people would execute people or kill people or punish people is incredible. All right? And to get thrown to a bunch of hungry lions, I don't know what that's like. But you go back to the first century, many Christians were fed to wild dogs, and it just wasn't a nice way to go. People were burned at the stake. Now, how can you get burned at the stake and sing praises to the Lord while you're burning? Most people are screaming. How does that happen? How does that happen? So I'm curious. When I read the book of Daniel, I read chapter. It's just not a nice. It's not a nice story per se. We're talking about a guy going to get fed to a bunch of hungry lions. And I think in life, a lot of times we go through and we miss the big rocks. Okay? Because most of us are driven by the tyranny of the urgent. And we forget what's important and what is important. But you have to identify what's important and what's not as urgent. For instance, some time ago, a lot of people believed, and a lot of psychologists believed, with the theorist Sidney Girard, that the key to a good marital relationship was self-disclosure. In other words, okay, so what's the key? What's the big rock? And so he would say, all right, let me give you a big rock. If it'll come out. Okay, here's a big rock for your marriage. You want a long-lasting marriage, here is a big rock. And so he said self-disclosure. He says, when a couple talks about their dreams and their disappointments and all that, and really unveil themselves and talk about their deep feelings and all that, that's huge. That's a big rock. Okay? Now hang with me. So people say, okay, good. We're going to do that in our marriage. We're going to put that rock in our marriage. Well, first of all, you got to make sure you have identified the big rock. Okay, so John Gottman comes along. Now, John Gottman lives in Washington, very well known, and he can predict if your marriage will survive. He's like 98% right. How's that? It's like, would you be comfortable going to see this guy? Seriously. What if he told you? But here's what John Gottman did. He videos couples all the time. He's got thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of couples. he analyzed them, they scored. I mean, it's real complicated. And he's been doing this for decades now. And he said, you know, that was a pretty good theory. But what we have discovered is, here's a big rock. This is the big rock. He said, small talk and high levels of interest. So when your spouse wants to talk about a green dress she saw in the store, as she was drinking a cup of coffee, walking down the sidewalk, the husband is totally engaged. How about that? Small talk. So could it be that we put in the wrong big rocks? I'm not saying you can't share your feelings. All I'm saying is you got to be careful when somebody tells you this is huge. It might be, but it may not be. I mean, just because they like it, it's a big rock. So all I'm saying is, if you don't put the big rocks in, you may never get them in. And as a believer, I need to make sure I get the big rocks in. So Daniel has been told that he's going to be fed to the lions, and what's he do? He goes home and there we find his big rock. Time alone with God. It was an uninterrupted habit. That's why he was going to get fed to the lions. I'm not suggesting that if you have your quiet time on a regular basis, you'll never worry, you'll never be struck with anxiety. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that instead of it being a 10 and consuming you, it might be a 6 or a 7. And I know the Bible says don't worry, stop worrying, and all that. But there are some big rocks. Listen, we know time alone with God, your quiet time, is a big rock. It simply is. Listen, I just talked about a marital relationship and how small talk, it's a relationship. When you're a believer, you have a relationship with God. He is your Father. Guess what? That involves talk time, relational time. And that's why you carve out time alone with God. So we know that's huge. We know that's a big rock. Hey, we also know that connecting with unchurched people and inviting them is a big rock. One reason we have the Great Commission, but also we have the entire book of Acts. That's all they did. That's all they did in the book of Acts. They just went everywhere, sharing Jesus Christ. So we know that's a big rock. There's a whole book, and that's all it talks about. So we know that's huge. We know church attendance is a big rock because, look, I don't know why God created the church to be the vehicle to accomplish the greatest mission in the world, and that's to reach people with the good news. So obviously the church is a big deal. I mean, it's mentioned over 100 times. In fact, in the first century, if you didn't go to church, you really missed out, because that's where all the letters, like Philippians, Colossians, they were written to the churches. So we know that's a big rock. But I also know, and this is in our text, or it's in the story of Daniel. Now, if you read it quickly, you might not see this. And that is spiritual warfare. Do you know how many times the Bible talks about how that we're in a battle? That we are in a war? I mean, I know you didn't get up this morning thinking, it's a war out there. No, it is. Satan would love to destroy your faith. I think of Psalm 71, an elderly person. is praying to the Lord. You know, it's not as common as you think for people to serve the Lord all the way until their elder years. People start to check out. They do. They say, well, I'm done. You're done? How could you ever be done? Some people are. Some people are. Oh, I did that church gig 32 years. I'm done. You're done? Anyway. Now, perhaps you read through a story like that and you miss it. And all I'm saying is, if my time alone with God is an uninterrupted habit, what if? I think there are some ifs in the Bible. Okay, for instance, 2 Corinthians 7:14. Now here's how it reads. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. In other words, God says if. Okay, if you do this, things happen. If is a transformative word. If you pray. I like the if in Malachi 3:10. God says, bring the tithe into the storehouse that there may be food in my house and thereby put me to the test. And then he says, and test the Lord and see if. I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you down for a blessing until there is no more need. If. You ever ask your question, if? What would my life be like if I had an uninterrupted quiet time? What would my life be like if God blessed me or blessed us financially? And you know what most of us would probably think? We'd be like, wow. If my parents took me, as you're an 8-year-old, if my parents took me to Disney World, wow. Or you say, well, if we could do this for our anniversary, wow. See, we go with ifs all the time. But I want to go back to Daniel and his prayer time. I mean, he had staying power that I've already alluded to. And he continues to work in government administrations. And of course, we talked a couple of weeks ago how that the Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire. And Daniel once again finds himself in a government position pretty high up, even though he's in his 80s by this time. And here's what I know. Listen, Christianity is frowned upon. I know we live in America. But we have politicians in America that do not believe that a Christian should serve in politics because Christians tend to have exclusionary views in a pluralistic society. All right? So, because you believe as a Christian that Jesus is the only way, that's really not healthy in our country at this time. There are politicians who believe that and have said so publicly. Now, isn't that odd? Go back. Go to the Supreme Court. I don't know why everybody should have to go to the Supreme Court. You know, it always kills me in this country when they say, well, we can't have the 10 Commandments here. It's in the Supreme Court on the doors. I mean, if that was obviously something that didn't wash, how come something changed. It's at the Supreme Court. They would never have ruled that, or they wouldn't have put it in your face, so to speak. So I know that doesn't work. So but all I'm saying is we've come to a place, even in our own country, where Christianity is frowned upon. We're seen way too narrow, and so was Daniel. And people didn't like him. And especially because he was a fanatic when it came to finances. And the king, Darius, was afraid he was losing money. They had this huge tax system. And evidently some guys were getting rich. You know, it does bother me. I don't know if it bothers you, but I don't know what we spent on our presidential campaign, but it was like, I just heard numbers like $1 billion, $1 billion. And then the recent race in Georgia, $50 million. Now, folks, something's not right. Something's not right. There's just something going askew. I don't think we can fix it now. The cows are out. But all I'm saying is, in big governments, there's waste. There's waste. I remember years ago, before Carol and I even got married, we had both learned this particular habit. And that is, if you're using the copier and something comes out wrong, you don't ball it up and throw it away. You turn it over, put it in another pile, and you use the other side for something. So when I prepare a message or I'm doing some writing, if you turn it over, it's got type on it or other writing, because we use both sides before we check it. It's just, I know that's a weird thing, but it's about waste. And all I'm saying, you can have waste in the smallest of areas. So when governments get huge, and Darius knew this, there's a lot of waste, but he was thinking, I think I got some guys taking some off the top. So he brings in Daniel. They don't like it. He's cracking down. He's cutting expenses. And so they're like, we're going to come up with a law. All right? But nonetheless, we're going to get there and read about that law. But I do like the fact that Daniel is still, listen, you can be in your 80s and be effective. You can. Thomas Edison was still inventing at the age of 90. So you can do quite a bit, even in old age. One of the big talks in basketball is how this guy's 79 years old and he's still being hired at $5 million a year, even though he's almost 80 anyway. But Daniel had staying power. The Bible says in 1 John 2:17, the world's passing away with all its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. The biggest, most powerful empire at its time, the Babylonian Empire, is gone. It's gone. Gone from history. Daniel's still there. Still there. And of course, people that he worked with weren't happy about it. So here's what these guys did. They conspired against Daniel, and they came up with this law. So here's what it said. They got an agreement. They said, here's what we're going to do. So they go to the king, and they flatter him. And most kings, and they like, to be flattered. Oh, King Darius, live forever. All the high officials, everybody, we've all agreed, the governors, we think you ought to establish a law. It's only going to last for 30 days. Now, see, there's a reason it's only going to last for 30 days. It wasn't going to take very long to nail Daniel for praying, right? I mean, if somebody came up to you and said, well, we know they go to church all the time and they do this all the time, we'll just come up with a law. It's only got to go 30 days because they can't help themselves. They serve God and they can't go 30 days with it. They just can't do it. I mean, because God means so much to them. So they just came up with this law that nobody could pray to anybody else except the king. And if he did and he was caught, he gets thrown to the lions. So they said, oh, king, so establish it, sign it. And then, so he signed it. And of course, Daniel was very public about the way he worshiped to God. Now, most of us, we don't pray in public, but, obviously if we get in our car and go to church, our neighbor might see it. So that's pretty public, if you will. I mean, if you invite somebody, that's public because somebody knows about it. But basically the law said, Daniel, you have to put your faith on hold. Now, he wasn't being obnoxious. It's just, he just couldn't let it be done, and he wasn't going to let the law. Listen, this is the same thing that happened in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, Peter was thrown into prison, and he was told when he got out, okay, we're going to let you go, but you cannot witness anymore. First thing he did was witness. Why? There's just some things as a believer you can't not do. Are you with me? Let me illustrate this for you. All you guys, you know this is a fact. Women, if you don't know it's a fact, it's a fact. If you go into Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever, you're a guy, you hang out in those places. And let's just say there's an attractive woman coming down the aisle, going down the aisle, whatever. Now, here's the deal. This is a fact. This is not a bad thing. It's just a fact. Guys can't not notice. I know. Some of you are thinking, well, if I walk in, no, I'm not letting her know I notice. Go right ahead. I mean, at least Carol and I, we've had this conversation. I'm not saying you stare at her all the way down the aisle while your wife's right. I mean, I'm not saying, all I'm saying is, listen, because you're a guy. You can't not notice. If you're a believer, there are things you can't not do. Are you with me? And when Peter got out of jail, he said, I can't not share my faith. So he did. Daniel said, as a believer, I can't not have my quiet time. And this is the way I do it. And I'm going to keep doing it that way. Consequences be what they may. So he goes home, throws the windows open, and prays toward heaven. Hey, listen, you're always picking up ideas, are you not? Looking for ways. Like, for instance, we have little booklets on the back table called Our Daily Bread that will help you in your quiet time. That might be what you need. Well, listen, let's read in 2 Chronicles 6. So Solomon was praying at the dedication of the temple, and so he's praying, and he says, if they sin against you, he goes on, he says, yet if they turn their heart in the land to which they've been carried captive and so on. Basically, he's saying in this whole passage, I'm trying to save time, if they'll pray towards Jerusalem, and you'll hear from heaven. So Daniel made it a habit of opening the windows and praying towards Jerusalem. Now, Psalm 55. Evening, morning, and at noon, I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. So Daniel said, I like those ideas. So I'm going to start praying every morning, noon, and evening, 3 times a day, with the windows open towards Jerusalem. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that in my prayer time. Just like if I said, take a book. You may go home, take a book, go home, and so now you're going to read through that book. You're going to read a page a day, because you find it to be helpful. Daniel found it to be helpful, and when they made the law, Daniel said, no, I can't not do what I've been doing. So he just kept doing it. And he's getting ready to go to the lion's den tomorrow, the next day. Now, hell, did he make? Okay. I don't know about you. And I don't want you to raise your hand. This is what I have found to be true in my life. I go to pray, and I've got one thing hanging on my head. And you know what? It's hard to pray. I mean, it's like, now if I have a list, it's okay, but I feel like, okay, all I can think about. If I'm Daniel, okay, here's me. Now, I'm not Daniel. I open the window. I'm going to pray to Jerusalem. All I can think about is the lion's den. That's all I can think about. Have you found that to be true? I'm like, this is terrible. This is terrible. I want to pray. All I can think, I can't. I mean, I'm overwhelmed. I'm just distracted by this one thing. I think, well, if I was there, something, man, how did he do that? Well, I just know that his time alone with God, it made a difference. I'm not suggesting that I'd like to be able to tell you that because of my uninterrupted habit of my quiet time, that I've never had a problem focusing in prayer. I can't tell you that. But I think it does help. You know, I don't know how much. But I do know this. We've talked about Daniel, his prayer life, what he's learned from the scriptures about praying toward Jerusalem. How many of us, or a great question is, Daniel's life was governed by the Word of God. Now, how much of my life is increasingly governed by the Bible? That's all. It's a great question to ask. Jeremiah said, your words were found, and I ate them, and your words became to me a joy. I'm going to come back to that word. And the delight of my heart, for I'm called by your name, O Lord, God of hosts. Do you know what I see when I, as an American, I don't live in other countries, but it seems like, okay, I understand I watch the NBA playoffs, football, and that's it, okay? But everybody's trying to sell me joy. A new car, a new toothpaste, medication, something. I have watched Jeopardy, and it's all medication. So I quit. I don't watch it much. Anyway, everybody's trying to sell joy. Jeremiah said, the Bible overwhelms me with joy. And I think the joy meter in America is very, very low. And so we're always chasing joy. Of course, we've been doing this since I was a kid. Everybody lives for the, fill in the blank. Everybody lives for the, I don't know if I'm hearing. No, the weekend. Okay, the moment, all that. Okay, you're right, that's true too. But I should say everybody who goes to work Monday through Friday, everybody's, when I grew up in construction, everybody's waiting for, now back in the days, okay, we gave out paychecks on Friday. That's the way we did it. That was back then. I know it's all different today. And everybody showed up on Friday, everybody. So you plan your work week a little bit. You say, well, on Friday, we're going to get a lot, because everybody's going to show up. And, you know, because I ran a lot of work for my dad, I had the paychecks. That's always nice. And we're not leaving till, you know. Now, my dad had a real nasty habit. It happened more than once because it was a habit. And so Dad, he just kind of knew when we were going to knock off. And so let's just say it's 3 o'clock, summertime, you know. And about 2:55, everybody sees the truck. Everybody knew what was coming. Dad, he'd show up. He'd say, hey, you know, we work a couple more hours, man. We can do this. You know, that'll ruin your Friday night for these guys. But we did better. But he knew that's when the crew, everybody was out there. Get a lot done. But everybody lived for the weekend. Everybody, the joy. Okay, you ought to have joy on Monday. And I know the old song because I lived when it was written. You know, rainy days and Mondays always get me down. Why? I mean, really, come on, as a believer now, you have to ask, why? Why do I not have joy on Monday morning? Got to ask. All right, I got to wrap it up, land this plane. Okay, so they caught him. Now, let's keep going. Chapter 6, verse 11, then these men, now, see that phrase, came by agreement. Okay, right in there. They were giddy with excitement. You know how it is when you do something or you nail somebody? Gotcha. You know how that makes you feel? Oh, you're feeling good. Gotcha. Nailed you. I don't care if you were playing sports. Guy throws his best pitch and you hit it for a home run. Oh, that feels so good. I'm just telling you. Oh, it feels good. Or you catch some, that's what these guys were. I mean, when they showed up and Daniel was praying, they could not contain themselves. They're like, he's dead meat. He's dead. Hey, he'll be gone by tomorrow. Gone. And they're slapping each other on the back, high-fiving it. Let's go get a drink. Man, I don't know what they did, but boy, they were excited. Because they caught Daniel making petition and pleading before his God, and then they went and told the king, hey, that law you signed, we just found somebody that disobeyed it. Daniel, look, come on, king, Daniel's just a nobody anyway. Remember, he was one of the exiles. He's a Jew anyway. He's not even one of us. He didn't pay any attention to the law. He doesn't even like you. He's not loyal to you at all. But it's amazing how people can spin a law because it always works for you. Does it not? Even in our own country, I don't like to listen to one party if they like the law. I want to listen to somebody in the party who doesn't like the law because I don't need the spin. I want the facts. I don't know. But boy, they spun this law to work against Daniel, and they worked it out in their favor big time. And the king was highly upset. He couldn't sleep. And he kept all night asking himself, how could I have been so gullible? Well, the morning couldn't come soon enough, and so at daybreak, the king arose and went in haste. And as he came, but you know what? He came in haste because there was an element. He didn't know much, but he knew Daniel's commitment to the Lord, and he knew God could do incredible things. And he had worked with Daniel long enough to know that Daniel had been through a lot, and God had continued to show favor in Daniel's life. So he knew that God was real, and otherwise, why even go down? You didn't want to see the carnage. Of course, it wouldn't be anything left. Why even go down there? Just get on with life. Well, he came to the den and he cried out to Daniel. Well, he was totally upset. And Daniel said, King, live forever. God sent his angel, shut the lion's mouth. And they've not harmed me because I was found blameless. Now, God doesn't always spare you. I know that. But he spared Daniel. Clearly in an ominous situation. And it would be nice to always be able to lay down at night. I wonder how Daniel slept. You don't know. Maybe you're thinking, well, they might get hungrier as the night goes on. They're already hungry, but so on. But I know this. Prayer is truly transformational. And it's so transformational. Do you know, as you read the New Testament, and if you had walked with Jesus for 3 years, what would you have asked him to teach you? You know, the disciples only asked him to teach them one thing, just one. And here's what it said in Luke 11:1. Now Jesus was praying, and when he finished, one of his disciples, Lord, teach us to pray. I don't know. I know we've got this prayer language. It kind of goes like this. And I know there's some great prayers in the Bible, but I know some guys, it's just not them. And they're like, oh, Lord. Oh, God. And I'm thinking, you don't talk like that when we're in the restaurant. Oh, waiter. You don't talk like that. I mean, if I go home, I'm talking to Carol. Oh, Carol. Okay, get in the car. Let's go to the hospital. Something's wrong with you. I don't know. I just think, what have we done to prayer? What have we done to it? That's all. We've done something to it because, look, I understand people don't like to speak in public, but they definitely don't want to pray in public. They don't. We were at Savannah's, I'm going to close it right here. We were at Savannah's wedding rehearsal, and so Zach's grandfather was asked to pray. So he was praying. Well, he mentioned Zach's dad instead of Zach. Okay, but we all knew what he meant, right? Well, somebody or a couple of people said, oh, no, it's Zach, not, Matt or whatever. And then he just, okay, cool, got that. So he goes on to praying. And I told him afterwards, we prayed. After we prayed, I was talking to him afterwards. I said, if I was going to teach somebody how to pray, I think tonight was a classic example. Because in a conversation, okay, for instance, earlier when I said people are living for, and y'all said the moment, and okay, but I meant the weekend. I was looking for the weekend and whatever. So, but we were just having like a conversation. See, prayer is a conversation. You've been in a conversation. Oh no, that was last week. Oh yeah, that's right. And you go on with the conversation. Do you not? And so he went on with the prayer. And I don't know, I think somewhere in life we have forgotten that time alone with God is just you talking to God, just like you talk to anybody. And God knows your heart. And you can just talk to him. Tell him. Plead with him. Tell him what you want. Ask for forgiveness. Ask him for wisdom. Whatever. Tell him what's bothering you. The psalmist did. Anyway, I want to come back and do another message on prayer only because I have a book. I have several books on prayer. I mean, I have books written by giants of the faith. And they typically all start off just being honest by saying, look, we all struggle with it. Yes, it needs to be an uninterrupted habit. Yes, it's transformative. Yes, it will change your life. But let's be honest, we all struggle with it. So occasionally we just talk about it and we address it and we just try to get a little better. And this will go on until you die. Okay? Don't let that bother you. Just make it a habit. If you need to, grab a book on the way out, but here's what I know. There's no dispute. Prayer, your time alone with God, is a big rock. And you better put it in the jar of your life, or it'll never get in, because all the urgent things will take precedence, and you will miss out on its transformative power. Let's stand for prayer.